slides. Okay. All right, can everybody see the slides?
Yeah.
Cool, awesome. Yeah, so welcome to the Research in CS talk. So I'll just give a little introduction to myself. I'm Lucia. I'm a senior and co-terminal master's student in computer science at Stanford. It's very nice to meet all of you. I'm originally from Portland, Oregon, and I've lived in Oregon my entire life before relocating to California for college. So I think like a lot of you, I've spent a lot of my life in Oregon. That photo of me in the right-hand corner is actually from when I declared my CS major. So I thought it was like a fun little tidbit. When we declare our major, they like make you stand in front of a nondescript wall and then like take a picture. Little did I know this would become a little artifact. But yeah. I prepared some slides, but I'm hoping this is more of like a casual kind of chat. I'm going to talk for maybe around 30 minutes and then leave the rest of the time for discussion and question answer. So this is pretty casual. I think we have a pretty small group here, so feel free to either like message into the chat or just sort of unmute and you know, ask questions. Happy to answer anything. So I think like basically the slide sort of guide with a bunch of questions about doing research in computer science. And so I think the big picture, like framing question is like, why do research as a student? And I think that there's a lot of benefits to doing research. Here are just like some of them. I think that it allows you to often work on a more independently driven project or inquiry. So I feel like of all of sort of my obligations at school, research is one of those things that gives me the most freedom to work on things that are interesting to me, as opposed to like classwork or like, you know, internships, stuff like that. And so I think that's like one of the aspects that I enjoy the most about it. I think I was also surprised, like this goes into the second bullet point, by like, I thought that classes were a good way to delve into computer science material and like, you know, acquire knowledge that is useful for like when you're like practicing as an engineer in the real world. But I've actually found that research has taught me a lot about like building systems, you know, looking at documentation, building off of what other engineers are doing and stuff like that. So it's actually quite a good way to like learn about engineering as well. So engineering as a practice from like a different angle. I think the third one is sort of like this argument about like the diversity of experience. So I think when I first got to Stanford, I wasn't super involved in research. And I think I've now concluded that like back then I didn't know what I didn't know because I hadn't tried it. And so that is like another tip, which is like, never really rule out anything. I think in the beginning, it's really hard to figure out, like, are you going to enjoy working like as an engineer in industry? Do you enjoy, you know, doing more academic research? And, you know, those like you should try things out before you like decide that you don't like them, I guess, or that they're not maybe worth your time, because there's so much stuff that you can be doing at university. And so like, you know, you shouldn't close yourself off to any given opportunity until you've confirmed that you maybe don't want to pursue it anymore. And then I think some more practical reasons for pursuing research include if you're interested in going to graduate school. So if you're interested in going to graduate school for computer science, then it's really helpful to have a sort of research background from undergraduate. And also if you're interested in doing research in industry. So nowadays, there are like teams of researchers in like large corporations and large companies that work on computer science research. And so you're paid to work as like a researcher in industry. And that's another goal that a lot of people have, or that's another place that a lot of people envision that their career will go. And so that's another reason it can be helpful to do research. So sort of what kind of research can you get involved with as a student? So like mainly I've seen sort of three different types or like categories. So one is summer research. There's opportunities at university, in independent research groups, sometimes in industry. And these opportunities are like fairly abundant, at least compared to the academic school year. And I would especially encourage, like, if you're going into college, if you're a freshman or sophomore, an underclassman, and looking for something to do for the summer, I would say that like undergraduate summer research in computer science is a really good option, especially because it can be challenging for you to find an internship as an underclassman. Not impossible, but sometimes more challenging. And research options tend to pay like a stipend as well. You can also find research positions during the academic year. Typically, these are called like research assistantships or research fellowships, and they also pay a stipend, or you can do it in exchange for academic units, depending on the program. And then another option that sometimes, you'll get, sometimes it's optional, sometimes it's required, is writing a thesis. So this is usually some sort of capstone research project done during the last year of school, whether that's for an undergraduate degree or a graduate degree. So sometimes it's optional and sometimes it's not. And if it's not, I guess then it'll just be like an enforced research experience. Otherwise, it's an option that you can choose. So how do you get involved with research? I kind of want to share the slides here after, because I think a lot of the information on the slides really isn't useful unless you can click on it. There's just a lot of links that I've sort of compiled on the slides, that'll lead you to different things. So I'll share this on the Discord after, but these are just some opportunities for undergraduate students. I think the main Google search term that you should know is an REU, which is a research experience it stands for research experience for undergraduates. And so if you just search up REU programs, you'll find a lot on the internet. Most research universities will hold summer REU programs, and they're often open to students attending other universities. And then there's also some from independent organizations, like some that are really well known are funded by like the National Science Foundation, the Department of Energy, etc. I also listed a couple of pretty well-known programs for high school students. I'll point out that the first one here is specifically for high school students in Oregon. And then a lot of the other ones are sort of open to high school students living anywhere, because I wasn't quite sure maybe who would be attending this hackathon. So these are just like some options. Most of the options I listed here are fully funded. So if you get in, then you don't have to pay to go, you don't have to pay living expenses, or at least you get some stipend to counterbalance that, which can be really nice. And so I think a lot of the maybe programs that are like super legitimate and like really focused on like helping high school students get involved in research will pay like a stipend as well. And so these are just some options. I think some general tips for finding opportunities. If you're a college student, generally a lot of colleges have summer undergraduate research programs for their own enrolled students. So like in our Stanford CS department, that's called Curious. And it's a program that matches Stanford undergraduate and master's students and to get them involved with computer science research. Another tip is to sort of look beyond your department. Some relevant research opportunities can be cross-listed or listed in other departments. So for example, I was like mentoring a younger student. She was a freshman this year studying computer science, and she was interested in finding a research project. And I suggested that she look at our like political science department's summer research college. And there were actually a lot of projects on there where they're looking for students with technical or CS background, and she was able to actually get a research opportunity there. So that's just like an example. I would also encourage you to look like broadly at research universities, both in the United States and internationally, and look in non-academic environments as well. It's like at companies, government institutions, and think tanks that might also do research work. They may also hire like research assistants who are students. So then the next big question is like, how do I develop the skills or knowledge to do research? So at least in computer science, I've found that the following like resources have been helpful. And I'll talk about this a little more later, but I think like this was always one of the bigger barriers to me getting involved in research. I always felt like, oh, I don't know enough, because there's just so much being contributed to the body of research, like that like moves so quickly that there's like always new papers to read. And often I've found that there's a gap between maybe what you'd learn in a computer science class and maybe what you're expected to know to work in a lab or work on a research project. And so there's a little bit of like self-learning involved. And I've always like felt a little bit intimidated by that. But these are some like good resources that I've used to try to like fill that gap for myself that I thought might be useful to you guys. So for reading papers, there is a repository. It's called the Archive Computing Research Repository, linked there. And essentially, it's like an online website that I think a group of like computer scientists built for sharing computer science papers and research, and researchers can like post their papers there. And so that's a really great place to look for research work, especially really recent research work, some of which may not actually even be published yet, is often available on archives. So that's a great place to look. Another website that I just want to shout out is Papers with Code. So if you go to this website, essentially it compiles a lot of AI and machine learning papers and the code that was used to implement it, or like source code. And that can be really helpful for if you want to try to re-implement something. And honestly, the UI is just like nice. You can sort of just search through things. And so I really like that. And then the third option is just to go through conference proceedings. So that's like if there's a computer science conference, they'll usually publish proceedings with their sort of what was accepted, like the papers accepted for that conference. And you can sort of just like trawl through that. And so that is another option. Some other things I found very helpful. Some of the resources that I'll list down below are a little bit biased towards like doing artificial intelligence and machine learning research, or like computer science research in that subfield. But that's maybe based on like what I'm sort of interested in. But I'm sure that there are other like equivalent blogs in like other subfields of computer science, and I try my best to like highlight a couple of those too if I'm aware. So for the research blogs, these are just like 2 links to blogs that really focused on a clear communication style for promoting general understanding. So like understanding for a general non-computer science audience. I think especially Distill like really focuses on explaining concepts clearly and using visualizations. And so I really enjoyed that website. Maybe I can just click on it to show people real quick. So this is sort of like the setup here. And you can like just sort of click on an article and learn more about that. Let's see. So again, they really focus on like the visualizations and like explaining different concepts really well. So I really enjoyed that blog. And then some others that you can look into are blogs written by university labs. They often summarize published lab work in a style that's pretty accessible to general audiences, written by usually members of the lab. And so these are some like good examples. And then there is also some blogs by larger companies. So these are like companies with research teams. And these are generally very well written too. And they often summarize like the heartbeat of research from industry. So another great place to look. There's also some that are written by individual researchers. So one that I really like is this blog by Jay Alomar. So I really think that his blog really embodies the saying, a picture is worth 1,000 words. I think I return to this website time and time again, and I always leave with a greater understanding of like AI and ML concepts that maybe I've learned about in other places or that I'm using. He, again, is really good at just like illustrating, I guess, different concepts. And so he explains like things like GPT-3 and a visual guide to using BERT. And he, again, is really focused on visuals. This is like introduction to NumPy and data representation, illustrating Word2Vec. So again, his visualizations are really great. I've especially found like this article to be really really informative. The illustrated BERT, Elmo and Co. I really enjoyed this article. Let's see, I think I just saw a question. Is there something specific you have in mind when you say research? Are you just referring to research in general? Can you go into more depth? Yeah, so I guess with research, what I sort of mean is we're sort of focusing this talk on research in computer science specifically. So I think that is just because, we're sort of at a hackathon related to computer science. Of course, there is also research in other areas. And sort of what I mean by research is that typically in a lot of academic environments and a lot of universities, there are a lot of people, whether that is professors or graduate students or others who are engaged in research questions around a certain discipline, here specifically computer science. Usually what they pursue a lot of different inquiries, they publish sort of their work in conferences and in journals to sort of communicate their findings. And it's a really big part of sort of the university and the academic environment in the sense that besides teaching, this is one of the main obligations of a lot of professors and a lot of graduate students. And yeah, so essentially I define research as any sort of inquiry or open inquiry or attempt to advance the general body of knowledge in a specific discipline. And again, within a university context, a lot of faculty members and graduate students would be engaged in something like that. So hopefully that's a little more clear. I'm getting some more questions. How many professors at a time do you recommend reaching out to? How long should I wait for a response before moving on to a new set of professors? So that's actually a great question. I'm gonna get to that a little bit more in a bit. And so hopefully I'll address that question. But if I don't, let me know. And then how do you tell a professor you already have an internship in a scenario where you have more than one offer? Yeah, we can talk a little bit more about that because that seems like a sort of specific scenario. Okay, and then another question. So you kind of mean applying your knowledge to real life situations and going above and beyond school. Yes, I think this is a sort of recognized, so research is a sort of, I guess a recognized pursuit in a way that is different from, I guess, yeah, exactly, going to classes or maybe even working an internship. It tends to be a little bit more open-ended and undefined. The purpose is sort of to advance knowledge in the field, I guess. Whereas if you go work in industry and you work in engineering internship, a lot of the times it's sort of you're trying to build a product or a service or deliver an experience. But the main goal is not necessarily advancing knowledge or addressing some open-ended inquiry. So in that way, that's sort of how research differs, if that makes sense. Yeah, and so these are a couple more blogs that, again, I enjoy. These are actually some blogs written by economists. I find that even though I'm not an economics student in a formal sense, that the econ blogs are actually quite interesting and often inspire me to think about problems in CS. So just a recommendation. And then also some general technology news platforms. So these are just news sites. I've especially found MIT Technology Review to be really helpful as a way to learn more about different tech concepts. Sometimes they do in-depth interviews with researchers and stuff. And so I find that they have really good quality reporting for the sort of research community. So I think another big question or topic is how do you actually go about building projects, whether those are personal or projects that you're working on in a team. Oftentimes, if you go and you're looking to do research, a professor might ask you, do you have any ideas? A grad student might ask you, do you have any ideas? So it's how do you come up with ideas? So one thing that I find really helpful is actually, especially in computer science, is finding open or public data sets to kickstart projects. So these are a couple of resources that you can go to for finding open data sets. And you can sort of just explore with them. So you can download them and analyze them a bit, see if there's any existing methods that are being used to solve problems on the data set. Or answer interesting questions. You can pose your own questions. And I find that that can be a really good and fruitful starting point. And then some useful tools for building models or running experiments, at least in computer science. Again, these are a little bit focused more on machine learning research, but there are equivalent or similar like libraries and ideas for running like simulations in other subfields maybe. Yeah, so these are just some resources. I think a great way to learn skills for doing CS research is trying to implement existing methods for a problem that interests you and then trying to build on top of it, right? So you can sort of take a look at some of the resources and existing literature on the topic that you're interested in, maybe find a data set and use a couple of tools that provide maybe more out of the box like implementations or methods that exist, and then like try to just like build something quickly and then figure out how to extend that or how to build on top of that. So I think that's a great way to sort of approach getting started with CS research and learning new skills that can be useful for CS research. Okay, so I guess the next question is, how do I write or publish research? So these are a couple of resources that I've been referred to a lot, like just even as a student doing projects for classes. These are just a couple of resources that I often get referred to for how you write and do technical writing. It's a little bit different from like sort of how you might write a normal essay or an English essay. And so I just definitely think it's worth reading maybe a couple of sources before, you know, trying to approach that. It's a little bit different, but those are some resources. And then how do I pursue graduate school in computer science? If your aim is to sort of do research in order to apply for graduate school, these are a couple of resources for doing that. And I think like some of these, like the third guide, really walk you through like disentangling why you may or may not want to, you know, pursue graduate school and continue doing research in computer science after your undergrad. I think also the second link links a lot of like blogs and work written by women CS researchers. So if that's something that's interesting to you, definitely check these out. The fourth link on here is literally the most comprehensive guide I've ever seen for applying to graduate programs in computer science. It's literally a 22-page paper on applying to PhDs in computer science. So it's like literally research about research or like doing grad school. So again, that's a very comprehensive guide if anyone is interested. So this leads me sort of to a more personal question, maybe like, what if I feel like I don't belong in CS research? And this is, I think, something that is really legitimate and a feeling that I really want to recognize. I think this can be especially difficult if you don't see yourself maybe in the CS research environment and in the people around you necessarily. And so for me personally, I've found reading writing by other women CS researchers has been illuminating, and it has helped me grapple with my own like professional aspirations and how I think about like diversity, equity, and inclusion in tech, both in my personal life and then also like systematically in, you know, research spaces, in industry, in an internship, things of that nature. And so these are like two really good sources that I go back to. And they're both written by women who are professors in computer science and engineering. So great resources there. Now some practical tips or advice. Basically, this is just me talking off the cuff, things that I personally have thought about, maybe irrelevant, but you know, I hope they're helpful. So I think this goes to one of the earlier questions, which is how many professors at a time do you recommend reaching out to? So this is sort of the first point. Sometimes the hardest part in starting to do research is finding an advisor or a project. Professors are very busy and may not respond to your emails. And so, yeah, that is a great question. Like, how many professors at a time should I recommend? Like, should I reach out to? One thing I will say is, like, whenever I talk to anybody, like casually about maybe getting involved with research and stuff like that, people are actually rather encouraging of you, like, finding other people to reach out to. Like I've had like grad students be like, oh, like I'm assuming that you're reaching out to, you know, other people about other projects and whatnot. So like, I think people are rather encouraging and maybe even assume that you're like taking that initiative and like not putting all your eggs in one basket, so to speak. And so I think it's totally acceptable to reach out to a lot of people at the same time, especially if you want a really good shot of being given an opportunity and being also given an opportunity that you really like and that you feel that you're a good match for. I think it is okay to reach out to, 5, 10, like however many things you can manage at once, like streams of communication you can manage at once. I think it's okay to reach out to more professors, especially if you're operating in a larger research institution where there might be a lot of professors or people are quite busy and maybe the response rate is not super high. I think that is totally acceptable. One tip is it might be easier to get connected through PhD or postdoc students working under a professor. I've generally found that they tend to be a little bit more responsive. And so that is a great way. Like if you want to work on an area of research and you find a professor who's doing interesting work, but the professor is not responding to your emails, you can try to connect with their PhD or postdoc students. Or maybe even their lab administrator. Some professors have labs with administrators who might be a little bit more responsive. You could also try taking the professor's class and visiting their office hours in person, which can be a little bit intimidating, but I've seen that work for a lot of people. I think professors are impressed when students take that initiative. It's okay if it takes time. I've had friends who've taken like almost up to a year to be matched to a project that they like. And like even for me, I've worked on previous research projects, and I think research opportunities and things that didn't even if it wasn't maybe the best match for me, taught me about what I was looking for. So I think like there's no really like lost experience there. It's always good to get more experience and to sort of narrow in on what you actually want to do and what's a good match for yourself. The next bullet point is just be prepared to get rejected or ignored. Don't take it too personally, and be persistent and connect with many people. I think especially in, again, large research institutions and environments, sometimes, especially if you're an undergrad, it can be easy to get ignored. And so just don't get too frustrated. And then another tip is to look out for research opportunities that come out on mailing lists, usually at the beginning of a new quarter or semester. That's usually a great time to sort of get involved in research and get involved in new projects. I think the next tip is like, don't give up on something you want because someone else said you can't do it. So I think sometimes the environment around research can be really intimidating. Like professors, PhD students might say they'll only take undergrads who are like extremely exceptional, only people who have original ideas or funding. There might be like language that's intimidating to prospective students. It might suggest that like you shouldn't contact someone, and don't let this discourage you overly. I think one problematic aspect of this language and tone is that it often discourages qualified students from underrepresented communities and backgrounds who might have trouble envisioning themselves as researchers. And then it actually doesn't filter out underqualified students with unbounded confidence who are maybe able to easily imagine themselves as researchers. Yes, I see a comment, Bob, toxicity, yes. But this is honestly a real thing. And I think that, again, I've yet to see the day where we find a good solution to this, maybe, because I think one of the reasons the intimidating language is sometimes there is because if it's not there, there's like almost too many people who are interested in these opportunities that, you need to be a little discouraging. Otherwise, like, I think maybe some labs or some professors are just left with just too many options and they can't even really sift through them. But just like keep in mind that that is like one reason why this might be problematic, and not to let that deter you. The next tip is that incremental progress is a good outcome. I have especially found it hard to pursue research during the academic year because classwork often has deadlines, but research doesn't. So it makes me feel like I'm always pushing research on the back burner in order to meet actual deadlines, right? And so I think that's why it's actually really important to make fake deadlines for yourself, if that makes sense. So either set time to work on research, like treat it like a class, right? It's like, okay, from, Friday, actually, I would hope that no one's having classes on Friday, maybe. So like on Thursday from 10 to 11, I have this like class, but from, 11 to 12, I'm going to work on research like it's a class, right? So like every week at that time, I'm going to pretend that I have this class and I'm going to work on it. I think that's a really great way to make like incremental progress, because in the end, I think like research fundamentally does have deadlines. Like you are trying to work towards a goal, but if you don't set those little milestones for yourself, then it gets really hard, or like I guess the big goal gets a little bit lost. Yeah. I also think sometimes it's easy to get into dead ends in research where literally nothing is working. And that when that happens, I would say aim to spend time doing small tasks that can move things forward, even marginally, even if it doesn't produce a grand result. So I have found, again, like ways that you can push forward and have incremental progress have always been, really good. So even if it doesn't seem like at the time the thing you're doing is like the most mind-blowing thing ever. So a good way to learn is to read. Another good way to learn is to do. So as I said a little earlier, an obstacle for my early experiences in research is that I always never felt like I had enough knowledge to be useful. And I found that the best way to deal with this is just to read broadly, but even that itself can be kind of an intimidating goal. So one helpful practice I have like sort of employed to get past this initial stage is that like you're never, maybe, okay, I don't know, maybe some people disagree with me, but I think that because there's so much work, like research work, you're never going to be able to read everything that's out there. And so sometimes the most important thing is to read things that are relevant to what you're working on. So that might mean reading like your lab mates' posts, joining a lab reading group, or looking at resources that summarize important or state-of-the-art results. And so that can help you sort of like cut through just like the barrage of work and the barrage of literature that you almost feel like, okay, I need to like keep reading all of this until I understand everything, when in reality, like the stuff that is most important to what you're working on is probably the stuff that's most valuable to read. And then besides reading, implementing models and algorithms and practicing certain research workflows is a great way to learn. So one thing I like to do sometimes is if I have like some idea that I want to explore or some method I want to learn more about, I'll just search up GitHub or open source, and then the thing I'm trying to implement or the model I'm trying to implement. And oftentimes some like open source, like public code or like a library will come up that helps you sort of gain your bearings. And oftentimes there are some existing implementations you can reference as a starting point and you can hack onto and extend. And so that can be a really useful way to see what other researchers are doing. And generally research, I feel maybe compared to industry, is a little bit more open about their developments, about sharing code, stuff like that. And so it's a little bit easier to find sort of existing research methods and their implementations in a public sort of domain. And then these are just some sort of like smaller tips. Have a good attitude and be responsive. I think even when you don't have the experience or capacity to contribute the most knowledge or code to a project, you can always be a good team member. I think some part of that is showing you're willing to put forth effort, participating in meetings, being receptive to feedback, and actively communicating with your mentors and supervisors. Like I think just in general in research, it's just like it attracts a lot of really smart people, and you can't always be the smartest person in the room, but you can definitely be a person with a good attitude who like shows that they're willing to put forth effort. And then do the small things well. I think, especially depending on your own seniority, if you're a little bit younger, then perhaps when you first join a project, you might be relegated to small, somewhat seemingly unimportant tasks. But over time, I think like when you build trust and show that you're capable of contributing to the project, you'll be assigned more critical components of the project. So you should like strive to do the small things well. And then my last piece of advice is like it's like a multiple clause sort of thing. Be realistic, critical, or receptive to criticism, and informedly optimistic at the same time. So I think these mindsets may seem sort of paradoxical, but I genuinely believe that this is the best way to improve and grow as a research. Sometimes research at a large research university can feel, oh, sorry, I just got a call. Sorry about that. Oops. Okay. Oh. Sorry, just got interrupted by a call. Okay. Um, so I think sometimes research at a large university can feel really competitive, and people might not always tell you what you want to hear. And to be honest, sometimes they'll be right. And so it's important to listen to honest feedback, and reflecting on that feedback will help you objectively evaluate what's achievable, but it's also good to leave some room to dream. After all, like innovative, novel research is research that hasn't been done yet, right? So it's like, how do you really know if something is going to work? You need to put a little bit of faith in that as well. But obviously, like, it is also important to evaluate, legitimate criticism and feedback. And I think this combination of mindsets is also useful for assessing whether research is for you. Like, you don't necessarily have to like research, you don't have to force yourself to like it, and a career in research is not for everyone. And so like just being cognizant, I think, but also like putting some faith that maybe this could be something that you want to try or that could work for you, sort of puts you or sets you up in a place to really assess that for yourself, which I think honestly might be one of the most important reasons for doing research at all, which is to figure out if this is really something you could see yourself doing in the long term. And then I guess a question that I haven't talked as much about is like, so what do I do? Like, why am I here? Why do I have any authority on this matter? And I would argue that I don't have too much authority on this matter. I'm at this point just a student. But sort of the type of research I'm doing right now is I'm a student fellow at the Stanford Reg Lab. It's an interdisciplinary lab at the cross section of the Stanford Law School and Stanford CS. And my area of research at the lab is sort of looking at machine learning for expanding access to legal services at scale and studying barriers to access to justice. And so currently my research work is focused on demonstrating and interpreting language model understanding of the law towards the goal of leveraging natural language processing, which are sort of techniques and methods in artificial intelligence for processing language, to design systems for helping government agencies make mass legal adjudication decisions more fairly, accurately, and efficiently. So essentially, a legal adjudication is making a decision about a certain claim. So that might be like a welfare claim or a veterans claim, which at the current moment, institutions are having a lot of difficulty getting through a backlog of these cases and delivering like legal services to people who might need it, and especially people who might need it immediately, I guess. So like for a veteran, if a claim takes like 10 years for a veteran to hear like a decision on their claim, then like in the interim time, their life is affected, they can't have access to certain resources, et cetera. So this is sort of why this is like an important problem, and a problem that sort of exists in various subspaces in government institutions, and could be hypothetically utilized in a variety of scenarios. So that's sort of what I've been up to. And so we have about 20 minutes left. And so I'm just going to open it up to question and answer. Ask me anything. I'm an open book, whether that's about computer science research, whether that's about being a student in computer science. I'm honestly down to talk about anything. Again, this is a really small group, so feel free to either unmute, or people have been asking questions in the chat too. So feel free to ask questions in the chat as well. Yeah. Yeah, okay, so question, I noticed you mentioned about researching in machine learning and legal services. What's your opinion on the future prospect of regulation for social media? Yeah, this is actually a really interesting question. I actually think that my work in industry and like interning has given me a better perspective on social media specifically than my research. But a couple years ago, I interned at Facebook actually on their community integrity team, which is responsible for dealing with like sort of managing content and promoting adherence to community guidelines for users, and preventing like hate speech and various types of content that like is undesirable on the platform. And my opinion on that is that like I really do think would be valuable to have a third party like arbiter of some sort who is able to like regulate and assess sort of some of these internal things, again, such as monitoring of hate speech from like a third party. And so I think like the maybe direction to go with regulation is encouraging like third party independent sources to evaluate the social media companies. And overall, I think we're moving towards more acceptance of that, and companies sort of coming around to that a little bit more. So those are just like my 2-second thoughts on that. All right, cool. So I think it looks like that's everything. Those are all the questions. So yeah, I don't know if I want to hand it back to Joy or Ryan, not sure.
Yeah, I think we can end the recording line.